Happy post-Thanksgiving, people. Hope you had a great holiday. This is, of course, Talking TV podcast. We are joined once again by the one and only Mr. Brandon Fallat in order to cover something that I think was expected to be more of a big Thanksgiving movie, that being Steven Spielberg's brand new semi-autobiography, The Fabelmans. Brandon had the honor of watching this earlier this year at Toronto International Film Festival, so we're going to talk about that as well. Brandon, before we start, do you have anything that you would like to tell the audience?
Hey Dom, no, I'm ready to go and ready to get into Spielberg. Oh
Yes,
wait,
Spielberg.
not inside him, but
Wow, we're already starting. We're already starting crazy. Oh man, all of that and more on tonight's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Talking TV podcast, people. I am, of course, Dom, the movie nerd, Rizzy, joined once again by Brandon Fallat, B. Fallat, as I've lazily started to call him. Brandon's been on a couple of episodes with us so far throughout this entire year. He's been a tremendous help. I love you, Brandon. You know that. You know, you're my ride or die, my number two from the Oswegonian days. How have you been, man? And of course, obviously, start by talking about how you got to watch this movie at Toronto International Film Festival. I'm really jealous. I've been trying to go there for years, and I just haven't gotten the chance. And you finally did it. You finally made it this year.
hey Dom, how's it going? Glad to be back on the Talking TV podcast. As far as how I got to go to TIFF in general, that was I want to say lifelong dream, but that was something I'd been thinking about since at least a decade ago. And me and my close friend Lewis finally decided, should we do this? Because usually it's in the first week of September. So, we're usually in school at that time. And then we kind of realized, well, we don't have school anymore. So we could really just do this if we wanted to. And we booked a hotel, got a new passport, did all that kind of stuff. And we made a lot of mistakes for our first time, but I think now I know, like, going into it, if I do it again, and I would love to do it again, like, I think I know exactly what to do now. So if anyone has any TIFF questions, I can tell you what not to do. Like, it's important, like, get a hotel closer to the thing.
We'll tell them your socials at the end so that they can hit you up for that.
Oh yeah. But no, just like, come to my place. And but anyway, what was I gonna say? As far as Fabelmans goes, that was the biggest premiere that I saw there. It was the world premiere. You had Steven Spielberg there. You had the entire cast, the main cast, and it was premiered in, I believe, the Princess of Wales Theater, which is a really nice old-fashioned theater they got there. Finn Wolfhard of Stranger Things fame sat like 4 rows right in front of me.
Nice.
But the movie, it was, just seeing the premiere, it was really special. You could tell it was like a watershed moment for Spielberg in his career, because the movie obviously has sentimental purposes to him. So it wasn't like he was just coming up there to promote the BFG or Ready Player One, where it's just like, hey guys, for this movie I tried to achieve X and hope you enjoy it. You could tell he was wearing his heart on his sleeve when he was on stage. Everything, every word he said on stage, so the cast had a certain weight to it. And and the crowd kind of reciprocated that, vulnerability displayed by the cast and crew watching the film. You did get a bit of a Marvel level interaction during the world premiere, where people were cheering when certain famous directors showed up on screen, or certain famous actors like Judd Hirsch or something like that. And yeah, it was like a crowd pleasing, I want to say romp, but like, it was a crowd pleasing, genuine, old fashioned coming of age movie, which was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, the coming together of certain of those elements are things that I was not necessarily expecting to be how they were going to be, but ended up kind of, I don't know, certain parts of that just didn't end up gelling for me as far as that goes. Yeah, this is a pretty big opening, obviously, not just for Spielberg within his entire canon, just considering how big of a career he's had, just how many movies that he has directed. The fact that this movie is finally being the one that's kind of labeled as like, yes, this is the one that I've like had in my heart. This is the story I've been like meaning to tell for all these years. It's interesting that he finally is able to put that out at this time period. And what ends up coming out is something that still kind of resembles a fantasy. Like, this movie is very clearly not a straight autobiography. There are clearly parts that he probably, made a little bit more fantastical than how they really were in real life. Clearly some of, like, particularly a lot of dancing scenes, and really just kind of how the mother figure, she didn't feel like a real figure, in that sense. So, like, just certain of those elements that, like, kind of helped to elevate it. But the thing that really stood out is how, like, kind of this can still contain Spielberg's personal touch. Like, I definitely see that so far as with the main character, but, like, as far as this being the movie that people finally say, just like, okay, yes, this is the personal Spielberg that we're waiting for. I just find that such an interesting point to talk about, just considering where he is at this career. I mean, he's been directing movies for a solid, 5 decades now, right? Since the 70s. And he's in like, this is how many movies now? Like 33, 34? I don't know. I've lost track. But yeah, so I don't know. There's definitely a conversation to be had around the whole thing of this being his most personal film to date. But before we got off of that, before we moved on to that topic, obviously, which is the next one. Oh, whoops. I just wanted to know, what's it called? Where do you think that this is going to stand? Sorry, let me rephrase that. How do you think this, like, still feels set apart from Spielberg's, like, just say, like, his last, like, his last 10 movies that came out, or like between, like, the late 2000s and the 2010s, when it was believed that he was at his creatively most, I'm not gonna say weakest, but most creatively almost defunct, I'll say.
Yeah, because typically when you're talking about Spielberg at his height, you're talking about him in the early 90s, right? I would assume.
I would say 80s to early 90s, like 70s, obviously, because of how much success he had in such a short time period. But really, for him, it's the whole 80s, and then, like, the early 90s is where it, like, peaks.
Yeah. I think it's probably my favorite film of his I've seen in a while. I can't quite think of the dates of his things as of late. I mean, I really liked.
Well, if you want the timeline, so it goes 2008, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, 2012, Lincoln, which gets all the Oscars. Then he takes a 3-year gap break, and then it's Bridge of Spies 2015, BFG 2016, The Post 2017, Ready Player One 2018. You just have that whole stretch of disappointments. And then 2 years off, 2020, the COVID. Then last year, West Side Story, and now The Fabelmans.
Oh yeah, I forgot about West Side Story. No, I remember the movie. It's actually, that's one of those ones that I forget that he directs it, because even though I thought it was technically well directed, it did not feel overtly Spielbergian to me. Anyway, out of those movies you mentioned, I think the one I liked the most was actually The Post, which is surprising because that was the movie that was, what's the term? It was sped into production given the political climate at the time, and they said, we got to get this made. I thought for the purposes of, like, what that movie was trying to do, it was successful. It's not a classic movie, but it's like, oh yeah, I can watch this and get a kick out of it. I should watch Lincoln again, but yeah, no, I think it's definitely his best movie in a while, usurping all of the ones that you just mentioned, because I think it harkens back to a certain spirit that existed in his earlier films that maybe got lost somewhere along the way. And I'm not specifically talking about things like Jurassic Park or like E.T., where it's like, whoa, look at all this cinematic wonder and he's changing the game in so many ways. I'm just talking about the actual, like, spirit of the characters and the story and the tone. I feel like it's much more in line with his more classic films than his films post 2008, or even the earlier 2000s. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. It actually gets better for me the more I think about it. I have not seen it since TIFF, but yeah, I would say it's definitely one of his best in years. I don't know if it'll be one of his most memorable, just because I don't think a lot of people are going to go see it.
Yeah, the thing that I guess kind of the time period that this movie kind of harkens me back to, as far as within Spielberg's filmography, which I think is going to sound kind of weird, but I'll turn it around as far as how it makes sense, is ironically enough the early 2000s, which is kind of like almost a forgotten time period for him, because it's like the late 90s where we saw a Spielberg drought because he was so exhausted from the double effort of Schindler's and Jurassic Park in the same year. And The irony being that happened then again 3 years later when he puts out Amistad and Lost World in the same year. But we both know that like he only really directed half of Lost World. So then he takes a couple years gap. Then he does AI in 2001, and then '02 another double release with Minority Report and Catch Me If You Can. So the reason why I say that this kind of reminds me of that is because I feel like some of the ideas that and themes and that spirit that you kind of mentioned that are shown in this movie kind of remind me a lot of AI, which I think is a really underrated Spielberg movie. You know, people kind of critics kind of bashed it when it first came out, and it was kind of critically but it kind of became a cult hit over the years. And recently the internet has kind of turned around the majority of opinion on it and saying that like, yeah, this is actually like a really, really good Spielberg movie. And the irony being that it's Spielberg's ode to Kubrick, because it was going to be Kubrick's film that, you know, obviously that happened. So it's kind of interesting in the sense of where there are points in this movie where the characters don't feel superhuman, like they don't feel real, if that makes any sense. Like they feel like fantastical characters, you know. I think that's kind of like my biggest. It's weird, like, because it sounds like a gripe, but it's not. I actually do think that there is that the movie does adjust to that as well. It was just certainly a little bit out of character for me, at least when it first started up, because I thought that I don't know. I guess realism isn't the word, you know, because the thing about Spielberg is that you get so used to him, you know, directing these big gonzo action movies that help make those larger than life characters feel more at home and feel more human. And then when it comes down to directing like the more personal, the more human stories, you know, I feel like after Saving Private Ryan, and a couple of movies in the early 2000s, he kind of loses that ability, and his characters start sounding like movie characters, if that makes any sense. And that's sort of the case here, but it's intentional. It's supposed to be that way, you know? Like I'm not watching this and getting the idea that, oh, these are very real people, you know? These are very clearly like caricaturistic what's the term I'm looking for? Archetypal character designs of him and his family. You know, we know what it's based on, and obviously the events that happened in the film for the most part probably played out like that in real time, but it's a fantasy at the end of the day. And that's kind of, I guess, like the biggest selling point, and that's probably what allows him to imbue this much spirit into this, you know, because it's like the movie is diving into like real elements, and I will say the further it gets as it goes along and like kind of mixes in his movie making with what's going on in his real life, I think it does get better, and I think it evolves. And I think the back hour leading into the last bit before he leaves high school is like the best stretch of the movie for me, for sure. But as for the movie as a whole, though, I think that's kind of where I keep getting tripped up on my rating. And as far as like this being the most personal Spielberg, sure, like most definitely, as far as like this being like the design that he puts into this, but like the whole idea, to me at least, of that like helping to set this apart from some of his previous efforts, like sure, it is that way by design, but like for example, I did kind of like West Side Story a little bit more, mostly because I just thought that there was a passion and a vigor that was put into that movie that I was not expecting at all, and actually made me care for and like a movie musical, which is almost impossible to do for me, you know, only in the year 2021. But like, as far as like, you know, where it ranks within Spielberg's overall filmography and how we transition to that point, that's a different discussion. But just as far as like kind of, I guess, how this movie is already starting to get like critically lauded and being like, oh, this is like potentially going to win Best Picture and everything. And I'm just like, I don't really see it, you know, but that's just me.
No, I get it. I mean, you know, obviously teaches on. I definitely disagree about the West Side Story comparison. I thought that movie, if there was something it lacked, it was urgency. like that is not that, you know, vigor and passion is not something I would use for that movie.
I guess that might have been exclusive to me.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed the film technically, but I agree with your point that in his past few films, the characters don't feel like real humans. If you look at a film like Jurassic Park or Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, Jaws, which are, in my opinion, probably his 4 best films. You know,
I'd throw Raiders in there too. I would throw Raiders in there.
I'd throw Raiders in at like 5, but I think
absolutely at 5. But like, yeah, no, those are like
I think those are his 4 if I had to pick 4. And I think those characters feel very human. And I think that was like his goal for all those films. And I think in his later films, you could argue all day about what was his goal for all those things like that. I think with a film like West Side Story, the the characters were it was hard for me to figure out what he was going for, because it was like, oh, is this like a dark and gritty take, or oh wait, no, this is actually just like the Broadway play because they're doing dance punching and stuff. But then like you have like all
but then
these
people actually got stabbed and died, and it was great.
Yeah, but like in a really cheesy like dun dun dun, and then
It was awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
and there was lots of like acting in that movie where people are like singing for the back of the auditorium, and you're just kind of like, okay, this is interesting. So I don't know, but I think with the Fabelmans, the film, I would still argue that it's his most personal, because it's him at his most vulnerable, where he's showing these situations, whether they be beat for beat what happened to him, or I'm gonna switch things up for the sake of narrative. And it's almost how he's coping with his own childhood trauma, whether that be how he viewed his mother, how he interacted with his mother, how the divorce affected him and his siblings, how him and the Seth Rogen character got along or lack thereof. And he's doing it through this 1950s style romanticized version of Hollywood films and coming of age stories, where you watch that and you go, yeah, none of these people feel like a real human that I'd see on the street. I mean, Michelle Williams was hamming it up by design.
My God.
And that's why
we're going to talk about her. Good Lord.
And I listen.
I talk about give me an Oscar. Jesus.
Yeah, I loved what she was doing. I thought she was hamming it up in the most complimentary sense of the word. And so while I don't think it was overtly personal in the sense that we're not seeing like this raw emotion of the kid like screaming and doing all this really personal things that you would see in a film like Saving Private Ryan or even Jurassic Park, I think it's personal in a different thematic way, in that you're watching this director look through rose-tinted glasses at his life, because that's the only way he knows how. Like, the only way he can cope with it is looking at it through this rose-tinted, romanticized, hammy way. And because of that, there's a vulnerability there, and there's actually an authenticness there that you kind of look at, you go, wow, like, yeah, it's one of his more artistic pieces, I would say, in recent years, because you could kind of look at it as like this beautiful introspective look at things, and then you watch that film, and then you realize like the films he went on to make from this figurative point, and
exactly, because of course you're doing the thing that happens in every biopic about a filmmaker, where you're like, okay, what point is going to inspire which of these movies, and which point is going to inspire which of these movies, and like moments of that were there. Like once they had the pet monkey, I was like, okay, that's a little obvious, but like if that actually happened in real life, that would be interesting. Like I am interested as far as figuring out like how much of this actually did happen in Spielberg's life.
Wait,
obviously,
what was the pet monkey?
What was the name or the part of the movie?
Yeah, no, what was the pet monkey kind of like inspiring?
Oh, the monkey from Raiders.
Oh wow, that went over my head.
Oh yeah, really? Yeah. No, there was a bunch of there were like brief moments where it was like, glass vibrating or something like that, some scary moment in some scary movie, when they were making movies as kids. And I'm like, okay, that's Jurassic Park, and like a bunch of other stuff. But that's just me like being an asshole. But like, I guess we should start by breaking down like what this movie's actually about, considering that we've talked about it for 18 minutes long. So this movie is a semi-autobiography about Steven Spielberg's life, modeled in the form of the lead Fabelman character. I am looking up what his name is now. Is Sammy Fabelman. That would be the son of Michelle Williams and Paul Dano's what's it called, Mitzi and Bert Fabelmans, loosely based on Steven Spielberg's parents, as they as the film opens. It opens with them taking him to his first movie, that being which was it, remind me again, where The Greatest Show on Earth, was it that one?
I think so.
Yeah, Greatest Show on Earth. They're introducing him to that movie, and he is wowed by the imagery, to the point where movies, of course, follow him throughout the rest of their lives as they move from New Jersey to Arizona to California, where eventually the parents end up divorcing, which of course leads to Sammy journey throughout high school and getting into the early film world, is roughly what it covers. The movie is about 2.5 hours long, which I will say that as good as the pacing is, as good as the storytelling is, it does feel a little fat at times. It could be trimmed down just a little bit, maybe possibly like a 2:15 or like a 2:20, but that 2 hours and 30 minutes I thought was like just a wee bit too long, but that's just me. So as far as like, so I guess first and foremost, I appreciate this not being another generic biopic. Like it's ironic because we're beginning the month with Weird, which is one of the greatest all-time just FUs to the general movie biopic, and we're ending it with the Fabelmans, which is like the most creative new attempt at one, because it's technically about a fictionalized character, because it is not Steven Spielberg in name, even no matter how much he drew from it himself. And he's essentially telling the story about this kid who like copes with, I guess you could say it's trauma, but I don't know. Like I would prefer to use a different word to describe it. I would say just his childhood woes, obviously, with filmmaking. Kind of like there are moments for me, particularly later on, where it's like once he really like dives into it and just uses it to like ignore everything that's going on around him. That was when it's like, okay, now this is really starting to register for me. That's when it like really started to hit home, and that's when I really started to feel what I like to call the Spielberg touch. Is what we like to call it when we talk about it in movies.
No, yeah, I get that. I don't know what to say.
Oh man, I was expecting more of like a witty comeback ultimately, but that shows how. But yeah, so point. But like I guess just as far as like the personal aspect of it, I guess that's not really like kind of the big selling point for me. Like I don't feel like I'm gonna look back at this one and be like, okay, like this one was really good. This one is definitely deserves to be like higher up in his canon, but I'm not sure if this is like all-time grades for me. That's the biggest thing. Like I guess like as we're gonna transition,
it's tough to hold a candle to the all-time
right, exactly. And that's what I'm saying, because like if people are saying that this is the best Spielberg in years, well, it's like, okay, you're already giving it that unfair comparison, because by nature we're gonna compare it to what are already his best, because we kind of know that he's already hit his best. Because if we're being honest, Spielberg has in recent years kind of gotten in a little bit into the doesn't really know what he's doing kind of older director feel. He was kind of a little bit past his prime ultimately, and so I'm appreciative that he is making a comeback, but like I don't want to necessarily overstate what he is actually putting out, because again, this is coming off of a decade of largely kind of, for me at least, mediocre Oscar hits and one kind of failed mid blockbuster. Like you had an attempt to return to like the Spielberg of the 90s with Ready Player One, with something that big and expansive, and it kind of ended up being like really boring.
No, I get what you're saying. Which is that, hey guys, like let's calm down. Like this is he's done a couple of good movies back to back, but like in comparison to the greats, they don't hold a candle, and I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But I also don't think just because the guy comes out with the film, that means okay, now like this is not great unless it's great compared to Raiders of the Lost Ark or Jaws.
That's an unfair precedent, obviously. But like I said, it's like if you're compared, like this is the same person who made all of these movies, so we have to take that like those periods of creativity for when they were,
Yeah, but I also think you can say, okay, this is an unfair comparison to make this, but I think it can also still be justifiable to say, hey, but it is still his best in years, and that's awesome that like he did this film, and it is what it is. I don't think you need to make one or the other or both. I think it's fine to make both statements if you want, but yeah, no, I get your point. I get your point. The film didn't quite register with you. I think it registered for me in the sense that it was a very nice, calm film where it's very mainstream. Everyone can, if everyone wants to go see it,
right? If they want to go see it, which is like unfortunate. It looks like ironically enough, this movie might be blown out of the water by Black Panther and Glass Onion of all movies.
Yeah, I mean, I already saw it, so this weekend I ended up seeing The Menu.
Oh, what did you think of that?
It was okay. I liked it.
Oh, okay, just okay. Okay.
I wish for a satire it had more fun with its concept. I thought it took itself way too seriously.
Really? You thought it took itself too seriously? That's insane.
No, yeah, I thought like they had a lot. off topic. I just thought there was a lot of moments in that movie that were like played for comedy, but they weren't played for comedy. Like everyone in the situation was taking it dead serious. So you're just watching like, like, okay, like this is kind of cool.
I don't know. I just thought the situations were just silly enough in order to like. They were just so ridiculous, and the fact that everyone was taking them so seriously just made it funnier for me. But that's just me.
I think the Fabelmans I liked a lot more than that. Like
I think. See, Menu is top 5 of the year for me so far.
What? That's crazy.
Yep.
That's crazy. It's funny how similar.
I really had fun with that movie. I really had a lot. That's the thing that always factors in with me is like whether I have fun at a movie. Like if I have fun at a movie, instantly puts it above like a lot of other movies. You know.
Right. I mean, that's the thing too. Is like a lot of movies, the goal isn't to entertain. You know.
Right.
That's the thing. Like if you go watch Tar, which I'm still dying to see, it's like that's not like a hey, we just want you to have a good time. Like you know, that's not what that's setting out to do. Now I will say with the Fabelmans, it is trying to do that. It's trying to give you like a full picture thing, and I think it's successful. I don't think it passes with like flying colors where I'm like, whoa, this is going to be something to be remembered. I remember at the end of the film, the world's premiere, they did a Q&A with Spielberg, and the director of TIFF was the guy hosting the Q&A, and he said, you know, you've had a lot of watershed films you know, in your career, and he brought up Jaws was a watershed film. The Color Purple was a watershed film. He brought up Jurassic Park, and then Schindler's List, and then he said, "Is this a watershed film for you?" And Spielberg said, "I didn't know any of those were watershed films until you just told me now." You know, so it's an interesting situation where, you know, again, it's. You know, all those films, we weren't around when they came out, so like we can read articles about like what the reaction was, but we don't know, and we'll never know exactly what size blip those films made on the radar. You know, how much were people actually talking about? Because listen, Avatar is the highest grossing film of all time, and like we know that when that film came out, it was talked about. Like people saw it, but people weren't going, dude, holy shit, Avatar's changing the game. Everyone's just saying,
I don't know, man. I don't know if we were in the circles yet, because all the circles were raving about Avatar. Like Avatar was big amongst the early film circles.
All right. Well,
like pre-film Twitter.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Twitter wasn't around that.
It wasn't. Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to my friend Francisca in the chat. What's going on? Thank you for being here. Yeah, so like that, I don't know, like that's why if we're comparing it to the Spielberg's greats, it's like everything else it's like every other movie that we're getting now in the 2020s, we always have to take it with a grain of salt, where it's like, we know that they're not like at their best, you know.
You get a film like The Irishman, which came out a few years back.
Yeah, which you and I are both huge fans of that movie.
I think it's like easily a top 5 all-time Scorsese.
Thank you.
I think you
and I are like the only ones who think that.
And I think it's similar to the Fabelmans in a few ways, more ways than one, because that's a film that is very introspective. It's this director looking back on things with this new lens, and you know, it's not as like, oh, this character's me kind of a thing, but it's the similar landscape of, I'm looking back on the things that kind of, you know, defined who I am, and this is how I'm looking at it through an introspective lens. And that film does hold up against the best of the best for him.
Yes,
like
I agree.
Mean, obviously you can argue, does it really touch Goodfellas or Taxi Driver? But once you start going, well, does it touch like Casino or all these other things? It's like, I
think it's way better than Casino. I'm not a fan of Casino.
Yeah, but it's up there. So when you have a film like The Fabelmans come out, you know, the only problem is it's Spielberg's biggest and best movies are either World War II epics or blockbusters. So this will not easily compare to those. So it's hard to, it's like weighing Honeycrisp apples and clementines. You're just
what's even weirder about this is this doesn't even like qualify as a blockbuster, but it's like, it's not an indie movie, you know. What's the most awesome and fascinating thing about this is that it is a mid-budget made movie. Like the budget for this is not that crazy. And like the thing is that like those movies are not made for theaters anymore. Those are the types of movies that go to streaming. And like what's weird is when I first heard this movie, I for some reason thought that it was being sold to Netflix, which I was completely wrong about. I have no idea what made me think about that, but I was just like, whoa, okay, so so that happened, but like I think that also kind of has to factor in as well is the fact that we're also in this streaming age right now, you know? And I think what's going to be even more interesting about his next batch of movies, because he's already announced that his next movie is going to be a new version of Bullet, you know, the Steve McQueen movie, but it'll star Bradley Cooper. So that's could be getting into like so also marking some new territory that he's getting into as well, you know, like some more like action minded, some bigger minded stuff, you know. So in a sense, this movie could be acting as like a transition period. You know, he's gotten like this very personal movie out of the way. You know, it's going to be big. It's going to be nominated for a lot of Oscars for sure. It will win. It has a good chance of winning for right now when nobody knows what's going to happen. But like, I would hesitate to say that this movie is going to be like one of the top 2 movies that get nominated for the most amount of categories at this coming Oscars.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of locks already. I think Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actress are all
and adapted original screenplay.
Yeah, I think those are locks. Like in terms of
for sure.
That's 4 right there.
I'd easily throw in supporting actor as well. Like, because between Paul Dano and Judd Hirsch, both in the front running race right now, I'd throw them in as well for supporting actor. One of them or both getting in.
So that's 5 right there. I mean, most movies would love to get that. I think
Everything Everywhere will have some categories locked as well for sure. If we're gonna go into the Oscars discussion now,
that's gonna be a surprise. I think that's actually going to get a lot of nominations as well.
Yeah. Everyone's got it in their front runners. That one, Elvis. Right now, the blockbuster lane seems to be torn between.
I love
right now. That's what you and I really disagree on. I'm not a fan of that movie at all. The blockbuster insert right now seems to be a tipping point between Avatar and Black Panther. Like, I feel like they're ready to give it to Black Panther, but Avatar is like just waiting. They're just waiting for it to land.
I don't think Black Panther's going to get a Best Picture nomination.
You don't think so?
I think the film will get some nominations as a like tip of the hat to what they did. I think Angela Bassett has a good shot.
Angela Bassett is a lock for me at this point.
I don't know if I would say a lock, but
she's a lock for me.
I don't think she's going to win.
No, not at all.
I think she's in the. I would bet that she's going to get in there. I don't know if I would say a lock. And then I think there's some other. I think a lot of the technical awards it's going to get, but Best Picture. I don't see it. I don't see it. I think
you don't see it. Well, and remember this too, though, that now officially last year marked that they are back up to 10 nominees. No more of this 8 and 9 BS crap. There are 10 nominees now, and that's a big number. But like, there's already a lot of movies that are battling for those spots. You know,
some movies great for the online community because it's like, all right, top 10, rank the 10.
Exactly.
It gives us a lot of ammo.
Yeah. Absolutely. And like last year, and the cool thing about last year's Best Picture is that even though it was a movie that nobody saw because it was an Apple TV Plus Sundance grab, it was still cool that was like, okay, that of the 3 movies that I would have liked to have won Best Picture last year, that was one of them. And I'm like, okay, that's actually pretty cool, you know? So, because unfortunately, Power of the Dog, good as that was not one of them.
I mean, one of my favorite movies of 2021 that got absolutely zero love was Mass. You know that movie?
Yeah. People thought Ann Dowd was going to get in for that for sure, and that was the one that got completely shut out.
That and screenplay, I thought it would have gotten a nomination for, but it was too small even for the Oscars. You think they would go for the indies, but like at a certain point,
and they did, but like they also knew they're like, we need people to actually watch us, and we need to nominate. But why do you think they're making such a push for all the blockbusters? Like all of the biggest movies of the year are up. Like Black Panther, even though it probably won't get nominated, but like for the conversation's sake, Black Panther, Avatar, Top Gun. Those are the biggest ones, you know. Elvis was a massive hit, you know. These are like the biggest movies of the year because they need to make this shit commercial as possible because they need to get people watching this stuff because this whole doing it for the movies approach, COVID screwed that, you know, and it kind of ruined the ratings, and the ceremony just hasn't been that good, you know.
Well, the ratings, I don't know. The ratings are going to go down every year because of streaming. Like that's just always gonna happen.
I'm just waiting for them to just stream it virtually on like a platform, you know, and like forget like traditional TV, you know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't
Like
know.
just think about think about the social media marketing campaigns and how many people like fall for like all the fashion and looks and stuff like that. Like if they applied a social media lens to that thing, I think it would be tremendous. And like they definitely need to put more into like digital clips. Turn it into like a real like commercialized like internet show. And make it more of a contest. Make it a fucking competition. It is a competition. Sorry, I'm not good with like reformatting the Oscars because I tend to go off on tangents because
Yeah, I
it
don't
always
know.
it always irritates me because the show could be so much better, and as it is right now, it's just awful.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I
and
don't know all the business metrics and
yeah,
like what that would, because I assume they'd be losing money if they made a switch from TV to
well,
streaming.
that's the problem is that ABC has obviously just made a deal with some museum of motion pictures in order to like just keep getting general funding. So even if the ratings continue to drop, they'll still have like a shit ton of money coming in every year to produce these shows.
That too.
And then they keep nominating movies like this, which again, nothing against this movie, but like in a strange way, this movie feels like the Green Book nomination, and that's not to say that this movie hits like there's so many differences between why these two movies will be nominated, but as far as like kind of hitting the same sort of beats and tones where it's like, again, it's just a nice movie,
It's a safer bet,
again,
but
it's the
but I
Forrest
also
Gump of this year, there's one every year.
yeah, but I don't think that's a bad thing because, listen, Forrest Gump is a classic. People love that.
They do.
Maybe people, maybe not people in the ultra hardcore letterboxed circles, but listen, mainstream America loves that
Oh
movie.
no, I've exposed myself.
Yeah, Green Book. I don't know. I mean, that movie just came out. I mean,
Great,
that one
that
kind of
was
came out.
just
But
man, I mean, already in a weak Oscar year to begin
yeah,
with.
I think there's a fine line between like an Oscar bait film and a film that is just very Oscar palatable. And I think this is a film that's just it's very palatable for the Oscar audience.
Yeah.
But I also think it's very palatable for the mainstream audience. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
are gonna watch it and listen. Like I always use my mom as like a gauge for any film.
Yes,
And
bro. We got to introduce this as a new feature to the show. The Brandon's mom's gauge. Where does this gauge on her radar?
Like I think she would see this and she would just be like, "That was good. I liked that."
Yeah.
And, kind of like how she saw Belfast.
Yeah.
Last year, where it's like it's a safe movie. It's Oscar palatable. I wouldn't quite say it's Oscar.
Yeah. Belfast tried that approach, and that did not work for them last year at all.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say it's Oscar bait, but I would say it's
no, it's too creative. It's too creative in its own right to be Oscar. To be straight up Oscar bait.
And I would use that same analogy for this, where I wouldn't call this Oscar bait. I think the introspective look that he's giving, it's romanticized.
The romanticization,
the acting and the performances, like all of that. I think it's creative enough, it's energetic enough to where I could go like, yeah, like I could watch this again if I was bored and I could get a kick out of it. Like it's not something I'm just gonna watch and say I liked it because I want to be right in my Oscar pool, So no, I think overall I really liked it. It's actually one of the better movies I've seen this year just because of how old fashioned it was and how it brought me back to films of the 50s, and I tend to like films from the 50s. And so I really liked it. I don't know how well it stacks up against Spielberg's masterpieces, but I have, I think it would rank in my top 10 favorite Spielberg movies, but that's only because if I'm really thinking about his all-time classics, I think there's only about 6 or 7 of them where I go, whoa, these are great. And then the rest of them are just like, yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah.
So because of that, I think it would probably be in my top 10 Spielberg movies.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, because I was actually going to ask where this ranked in the canon, so that was so you actually kind of answered that. For me, this is like again similar to West Side Story. I haven't seen all of his great ones, like famously. I still have. I'm starting to call them like the Lost Six, or like I'm starting to call them like the Infinity Gauntlet of my not watch Spielberg canon, because of course the eponymous 6 Spielberg movies that I still have to watch are as follows: Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Color Purple, Empire of the Sun.
I haven't seen those 3
AI, War of the Worlds, and Munich. It's those 6 that I saw.
Yeah, those are all like his underrated gems that people say like, hey,
those are the great ones. And like I watched Minority Report, and that's not quite an underrated gem, but like I would tend to agree that Minority Report ages fantastically, even if there are certain elements of it that are a little corny. But Catch Me If You Can for him easily wins O2. Catch Me If You Can is like right up there underneath, like you said, the Immortal 5, which are as you said, right? Jaws, Jurassic Park, Schindler's, Saving Private Ryan, and Raiders, right?
Yeah, and then I guess E.T. is like around.
E.T. is up there. E.T.'s right there with
I
them.
mean, for me, my like top two, which are two of my all-time favorite films, they're probably, I don't know, I don't have like a top 10 or top 20 all time, but they'd probably both be in there, is Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. Those two, I think, is like just one of
Those
the
two
most
really.
beautiful companion pieces.
So it's like if you were trapped on a desert island, you had to pick like save two of Spielberg's movies. You would pick those two because I would easily swap Schindler's List for Jurassic Park in that case. For me, it's Saving Private Ryan and Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park, I liked it a lot as a kid, but I didn't jump on the train as much. So
man,
it's one of those things where it's like I watch it now as an adult. I'm like, yeah, like that's awesome. It's a classic film, but like I'm not like,
I could watch that movie over and over and over and over again. I love that movie.
Schindler's List over and again.
I might have some questions. Just saying, I might have some questions.
I think it's a beautiful story.
we're gonna wrap up soon, but I wanted to ask this one last question because I think it's fair. Just given, like you said, this kind of ties back into our whole point about like Spielberg having this movie that follows up like kind of the last couple of years. I think it's safe to say that the 2010s were not exactly the best for Spielberg. I would argue still that his later 2000s were kind of rough, solely based off Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But it feels like after this is, I would say, I mean, West Side Story got a lot of nominations last year, but this is like his next like big like movie that's like gonna get a lot of Oscar nominations and up for win. Ironically enough, 10 years since his last one of those, which is Lincoln. But again, every movie that he's done after Lincoln, I don't know what happened. It's like he got tired for a while. He wanted to make some easy, scripts and some easy paychecks and work with a lot of big movie stars, and he did that for a couple of movies. But it feels like he's kind of back. It feels like he's like found his, for lack of a better word, found his groove again and is back. So, now that the next couple of movies that he's making sound like relatively interesting, I don't know. The question I have for you is Spielberg back from a creative drought? If you think a drought was ever there in the first place?
I don't know if I would say a drought has ever been there in the first place. But I understand what you mean. I think he's starting to lean more into that Clint Eastwood director territory,
right?
Where it's, you don't quite know what you're gonna get, but it's not gonna be like amazing, because like Clint Eastwood, like he directs like you're either gonna get $1 Million Baby or Gran Torino, or you're gonna get like 15/17 to Paris or Hereafter.
Oh my God! Don't remind me of that one. Oh man, that was a dark period for us up there in Oswego. The beginning of spring of 2018. We got some weird movies. Remember that Netflix movie Mute that came out with Paul Rudd and Alexander Skarsgård? You remember that movie?
Yeah. Plus, actually thinking about it now, off topic, I really like $1 Million Baby. I was just thinking about that. I should rewatch that. But as far as Spielberg, a drought. I would agree. I wouldn't disagree. Because Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a lot of duds. He's made a lot of duds, and even his good movies, you kind of just like you wonder how much his name being attached to it is propping up your like thoughts about it, because I think maybe that's something that kind of went into my thoughts about West Side Story or The Post, where I'm like, okay, but Spielberg, I mean, he's the master. He did this, so that's got to say something. I would say that The Fabelmans is his best movie since Crystal Skull. I would say.
Yes, I agree.
And
way better than Crystal Skull too, which I would still venture to say out of the ones we've seen, Crystal Skull for me is still the worst, but a couple of those ones that came out in the late 2010s, I was not a fan of either. So
I would say Crystal Skull's probably my bottom of the barrel too. Yeah, so I would say for me, it's the best film of his I've seen in a while. In the sense that I would love to rewatch it. I would love to watch it multiple times, and for all its imperfections and how it might not compare to like his all-time classics, which are all-time classics of film as a whole,
right?
So that's like a holy grail, holy pantheon to like compare to. So like if you're not counting those, I think it's a damn good movie. And I wouldn't mind if it won Best Picture. I wouldn't be too depressed about it. I maybe I'd give it to Everything Everywhere All at Once at the moment.
Right now, I'm about to check the Gold Derby odds right now.
I think it's number one. I think it is. Because I checked something a while ago and it was number one, and then I think Banshees of Inisherin was close, and I think Everything Everywhere All at Once was kind of in there. Tar was around there. She
Yeah.
Said.
Right now, Letterboxd currently has Fabelmans, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, Banshees of Inisherin, Women Talking, Top Gun Maverick, Tar, Babylon, and then below it, it's a three-way toss-up between The Whale, Avatar, and Elvis. She Said is currently sitting right below them, is what we have right now.
Those three-way ties, what places are they going for?
Right now, it looks like they're going for the 10th spot. She Said is currently out. They also still say that The Whale is competing for Best Picture as well, but I feel more inclined to say that, like, I don't know, because, like, The Whale seems to be similar to what Darren Aronofsky did with The Wrestler back in 2008, and The Wrestler really only worked for Mickey Rourke, and he still didn't win ultimately, but that was after the fact. I'm talking as far as the nominations go, because The Wrestler was not nominated for picture or director.
So I'm just thinking. So Fablemans, Everything Everywhere, Banshees, Tar,
Women Talking, Top Gun, Babylon,
and then a three-way tie.
Yeah.
Oh, so those three movies are kind of going for the to fill the 10.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I would love to see Elvis get a Best Picture nomination. It wouldn't win, but I would just love to see.
There's also, of course, a couple of other outliers as well. Glass Onion as well is pretty high up there, and Glass Onion is trending very, very well. Like they are really struggling to put Glass Onion towards and pushing that towards getting the big prize and not just another screenplay thing.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it. That was actually a movie I was supposed to see at TIFF, but we were so exhausted from the Fabelmans world premiere. And again, we made a mistake. Our hotel was like a 30-minute walk. So, we finished the Fabelmans premiere at like 1 a.m. We don't get back to like 1:40. And then the Glass Onion showing was like the next day at 9 a.m. And I just said, I'm gonna sleep.
Yeah.
So I missed it, but I didn't see it. But yeah, I mean, I would, if the Fabelmans wins, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. We also have two more comments on there as well before we wrap up and get out of here. John P. Jones, 1941 was pretty bad, except for Eddie Deason. And Mr. G, movie reviews, 1941. Yeah, 1941. That's one that people always talk about as being infamously terrible. I haven't seen it. I don't know if I will ever get. That's kind of like his lost movie from the 70s, and rightfully so.
I didn't like The Terminal either when I saw that.
I have not seen that, and I kind of have no interest in seeing that.
Kind of like a rom-com that just didn't quite succeed.
We also talk about the fact that for somebody who was so exhausted from putting out 2 movies in 1 year, how he did it 4 more times. 97, 02, 05, 2011, and there was one other that I'm forgetting. But yeah, 4 more times. That right there is just absolutely insane. But before we get out of here, Brandon, thanks once again for joining us. This is awesome. This is a great time. Before we get out of here, give us your final thoughts and star rating on the Fabelmans.
I think the Fabelmans is a solid 4 out of 5 for me. I was leaning towards 4.5, but then I decided not to. I think if I see it again, that would solidify for me. But I think it's a solid 4 either way. I don't see myself liking it less.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I gave it, if I'm pulling up my Letterboxd review right now, I gave it a 3.5. Ultimately, it's interesting to me still, like the approach that he takes with it, where again, it is almost like this fantastical take on what would be a typical biopic story ultimately. I feel like the first half was a little bit too like kind of whimsical and happy-go-lucky for me. But eventually it warmed up to me as the movie got older and the movie almost matured with its audience. I will say as well, for me, the winning point was the lead actor to play the Spielberg stand-in, as I call him, Gabriel LaBelle. I thought that his part was in particular really interesting, and I appreciated his arc as well. For me, the most disappointing thing about this, and I'm giving this, and I'm saying this as a shout out to Dustin as well, how it is killing me that this movie will likely be Paul Dano's first ever Oscar nomination, which is just tragic when you consider how many movies. No, I'm not. This isn't anything to take away from him. This is another dig at the Oscars and the fact that they are continuing with their track record of only ever nominating people when they're like, finally been working for a long time.
Yeah, like I always think of like Laura Dern winning for Marriage Story.
Right?
Like, really? And I was like,
right.
Really? Like she wins for that one?
Right.
I was like,
that's the one.
I always thought she should have I thought she should have won for like Little Women when she was in that same year.
Right?
I thought she was way better than that one. but she won for Marriage Story. I was like,
And
oh,
Little
okay.
Women was just another vehicle for Saoirse. Only Greta Gerwig just didn't have as much success with that at all. Although it was nominated for Best Picture.
Oh, I
But
love Little Women. I thought that was
no,
great.
I'm not saying anything
No,
about like personal thing.
kinda-
Little Women, I thought it was just okay. But yeah, so I gave Fabelmans 3.5. It's fine. It's okay. It's like right in the middle for me as far as Spielberg goes. And that's exactly what my thoughts are on the movie as well. So with that being said, Brandon, thank you once again for joining. Thanks to all the people for joining us tonight for our show. We have only 4 episodes left of 2022 of our 4th season, which has been, I'll admit, a tumultuous one, but thanks to guys like Brandon, like Yolo, like Joe, like Luke of Luke Reviews, Kristen of Atmos Filmmaking. I just wanted to give you all of you guys a shout out because all of you guys are so responsible for helping me help me and Chris get through this year. It's been a rough one at points, I will admit, but thanks to all of you guys because you guys have all made it work. I want to potentially have you guys all on, including you, Brandon, for something special that I'm planning at the end of the year. I don't know what it is yet, but it's in the final stages. So with all of that being said, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Oh, just Brandon_Fallon on Instagram, I guess.
Oh, come on. Weren't you literally just promoting Rattle Cage Productions at the
Oh,
beginning?
yes. Rattle Cage Productions. Yes, that's also, if you go to my Instagram, yes, it's on there too.
There we go. That's more like it. Of course, at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms and on Twitter as well. At the official Talking TV podcast, specifically on Twitter, where I'm retweeting stuff all the time. And the TikTok, where you can see clips of all of our podcasts on there. You should check that out as well. That usually gains a lot of traction. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.